Relog page.
And it should pop up when it's live.
Give me just a second, guys. It takes a few minutes to do the Zoom to Facebook kind of transfer here.
Yeah. See. I'm checking. It does not seem to be popping up. We're checking.
Okay, are we live?
I think we might be live. I don't know if you actually do need to be logged in.
Okay.
Let me give you my.
Okay, Gable, can you confirm that we are live?
We
I
are.
need to do. I need to moderate on mommy's phone because
We thought we had it together. I don't think we do.
Okay.
Okay, we are live though.
Yeah, we are live.
Okay, and welcome to yet another episode of Hollywood Kitchen. I'm really excited about this one because my friend Christina Rice and her daughter Gabriel are joining me. They are Hollywood Kitchen regulars at this point. And we are celebrating because tomorrow, June 21st, marks the 100th anniversary of the birth of movie icon Jane Russell. And this week has marked the launch of Christina's new biography on Jane, Mean, Moody, Magnificent, Jane Russell and the Marketing of a Hollywood Legend. So Christina, welcome. Gable, welcome.
Thank you, Carrie. It's so great to be back. Yes, we are reoccurring guests. We have decided is how we would like to be designated, right?
Recurring guests. I love it. I love it. When researching this episode, when we decided to do it and everything, you told me Jane hates cooking, Carrie. So if you find any Jane recipes, they are a pack of lies.
That is absolutely true.
And it's funny because during our research, I would text you Jane recipes here and there, and you'd always text back lies. But
True. Now I have interviews with her early on in her career where she says she hates cooking. I have interviews with her like later on in her life where she says she hates cooking. So Jane was not shy about how much she hated cooking.
Yes. And when I found various recipes in various cookbooks, but the one we decided on, I went through some film magazine archives, and Hollywood Magazine in 1941, super early before The Outlaw even came out, they did a profile about Mexican food that Jane loves that she learned how to make while shooting The Outlaw. And the article is absolutely hysterical. It talks about how Jane followed these women around in a Mexican village with her notebook, taking notes on how they cooked, and how Mexican food requires so much patience because, and I quote from the magazine, you can't hurry a frijole. And it's so, the way it's written is so funny and entertaining. And there were several recipes listed about Jane's, favorite Mexican food. And one of them was this hot chocolate recipe. And we decided, you were the one that decided for all intents and purposes, this would be the way to go.
Yeah. So I figured if Jane would actually cook anything, it would be like heating up milk and chocolate would probably be the extent of it. So yeah, and it just goes to show how like early on in her career, she was subject to that very, very Hollywood publicity. So 1941 is when she's first introduced to the world, and when The Outlaw, it started shooting on location in Arizona. So somebody dreamed up this article about Jane, following around, learning how to cook, but no, her husband, Robert Waterfield, who was quarterback for the Rams, he did the cooking in the house. So Jane was happy to clean. She was more than happy to do the dishes. But no, the cooking was all Waterfield.
At one point, we actually talked about doing this episode and talking about Jane while doing dishes, but then we decided we would actually make some food.
Yes. So we will make hot chocolate.
Well, before we get into the hot chocolate though, what was your first introduction to Jane Russell? How did you first discover?
I mean, my first introduction was probably her Playtex bra commercials when I was a kid in the 80s. So Jane was the spokesperson for Playtex for a number of years, which, I think speaks to how much Jane could have a sense of humor about herself. Her career was kind of launched around publicity focused on her breasts, and that she was able to just go ahead and cash the paycheck and, support full-figured women like herself, I think speaks a lot to how she never took herself that seriously. But my introduction to her as an actress was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So it was on local TV here on the weekends. We had something called the Family Film Festival that was hosted by Tom Hatton. And so Gentlemen Prefer Blondes with Jane and Marilyn Monroe was my introduction to her. And, she's the two of them are so incredible in that film that I always loved Jane just based on that one performance as Dorothy Shaw. Never dreamed I would end up writing a book on her, though.
I agree. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was also my introduction. And one thing that always stayed with me was how she and Marilyn were friends, and they weren't, because a lot of times when you have two female leads, they're clawing each other's eyes out, they're fighting up for men, but in this case, they were buddies and she had Marilyn's back. And I remember really thinking, oh, that is really cool. I like that, and they seemed to balance each other so perfectly in that film.
Yeah. And I think, and that's on screen and off. Off screen, the two of them got along fantastically. Jane, again, she was just a pretty secure person. She had great relationships with other women. She just wasn't threatened by other women. So I think she genuinely saw Marilyn. There was a lot of vulnerability. Jane saw that. And so Jane was kind of, a big sister to Marilyn on the set of that film. And, I think, and Jane, she knew what a great opportunity that film was. She originally should have been directed by Howard Hawks in The Outlaw, but him and Howard Hughes did not see eye to eye. So Hawks walked off the film, and a full decade later, she finally gets the opportunity to work with Howard Hawks. It's a 20th Century Fox Technicolor film. So Jane wasn't much of a diva anyway, but she certainly wasn't going to spoil this opportunity by being a diva on the set with Marilyn. So that chemistry you see on screen definitely carried over off screen, to the benefit of all of us who have watched that film. I think literally for me hundreds of times at this point.
And speaking of that, we do have a lot of congratulations on your book. Can't wait to get it.
Thank you.
Hello to everyone, and there's some people who like your t-shirt.
Oh, my t-shirt. So the one thing about Jane, so when I've done the other episodes, I've gone into my closet and pulled out the dresses. For as glamorous as Jane was on screen, off screen, she just loved to wear like jeans. She was very casual. So in honor of Jane, I went casual today with my t-shirt by, do you know how to pronounce his name?
Alejandro Almagola. I'm gonna terribly mispronounce it, but
yeah, I am too.
I love his stuff.
Which is why I put you on the spot. He's fantastic. He does tons of Marilyn, lots of Vivian Leigh too. He didn't have any Jane, and so I messaged him last year. I'm like, if you ever get around to it, man, if you could do a Jane, and I don't know if he did Jane because I asked him to, but Jane popped up on his website. So yes, so I have my Bye Bye Baby shirt from him.
We also have some Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, one of my favorite films. There's one of those too.
People are commenting that Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Yeah.
Yes, that it is one of my all-time favorite
and
films.
How it's one of the best Hollywood girl team up, Jane and Marilyn.
One of the
And
best.
by the way, Christina, later in the episode, will you show us the big 4 sheet?
I can, if you excuse the mess of my house, and it is a 6 sheet.
Oh, 6 sheet. Oh my God, a 6 sheet. Okay, that's right. I got it wrong there.
And somebody said they love the guys that made your t-shirt and armor stuff too.
Yes, he has great. Yeah, he has. If you go to Redbubble and look him up, this artist, he does so many Hollywood women, and they're fantastic.
I'll post a link on Facebook later and on the HollywoodKitchenShow.com blog to his work, because his work is wonderful. I love it as well. It's great.
Work is wonderful. And so thank you everybody for the congratulations. And if you're interested in the book and haven't ordered it yet, I do recommend going to the Larry Edmunds website and ordering from Larry Edmunds. I think right now he has about 7 copies left. And if all of those 7 copies sell, I will be one of the Larry Edmunds 100 book author. So I would like to sell the rest of those books to be in that elite club. And
Yes.
all of those are personally signed by me. So Larry Edmonds is the place to purchase them from.
And that bookshop is a treasure that we need to support with our wallets.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, Gable,
we do have a comment saying that the 6 sheet is one of the most amazing things.
The 6 sheet is the most, yes,
ever seen in the.
It is. I caught auction fever last year. Had I not purchased that, I would have no credit card debt at this moment, but instead I have an amazing 6 sheet.
I know, the pandemic, I wound up doing a lot of internet shopping, and then the next morning I'd forget I'd done it because it was real late at night and I was all stressed. And then I'd wake up and be like, why are these boxes on my porch? What did I order?
Yeah, I did a lot of stress shopping. I bought a lot of I bought a lot of vintage Girl Scout dolls early last year. That was my ultimate like pandemic stress release for some reason, was Girl Scout dolls.
We do have a question.
Oh, we have a question.
We have there's a way to get an autographed book addressed to theirself from Larry Edmonds.
Oh yeah, if you just go to Larry Edmonds and order the book, you can either enter how you want it personalized, or they'll get in touch with you to find out how you want it personalized. And I live like 10 minutes away, so I'm always happy to go pop in and sign books.
Should we start the recipe really quickly?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, now this is spiced cocoa. I will post the recipe also on the HollywoodKitchenShow.com blog. We have 6 cups of milk right here, this big bowl. We've got 5 ounces of shaved chocolate. Mine did not shave that well, but it's at least broken up into pieces.
We did.
We've also got 5 teaspoons of sugar, half teaspoon of nutmeg, 2/3 teaspoon of allspice, and 2/3 teaspoon of cinnamon. So
all of our spices are already in one.
Okay, well, I will dump mine now in the pan here.
Okay.
I love recipes where you just dump everything in one pan. Those are so nice.
Okay, I'm gonna dump the chocolate in.
Okay. Place all ingredients in large saucepan over. And stir over the heat. I will add the milk as well.
6 cups, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have a lot of hot chocolate.
Somebody just commented about that Carrie's making whole 6 cups. Who's coming over?
Yeah.
Somebody commented, Carrie's making the whole 6 cups. Who's coming over?
I know I'm not, but what I figured I would do, since it is summer and it is blistering hot outside right now in LA, I thought I would make the whole thing and maybe put a bunch of it in the refrigerator and let it get super chilled and have some of it like tomorrow morning or later this week, or, kind of stretch it out in this particular case. But yes, usually I do half the recipes or make a much smaller version because it's me.
Do you want to can you go back there and get a wooden spoon in the corner?
Okay, it's taken a minute for my my hot plate to warm up here.
Okay, so I'm gonna task Gable with stirring.
Right, I'm grabbing a wooden spoon to start with.
And while I'm stirring, it says to use the rotary mixer, but my kitchen is really tiny, and if I use that, it's either going to make a ton of racket on Zoom, or Zoom will just mute it completely, which is what it did on the Gracie Fields episode.
We're going to attempt to use the rotary since we're across the room a little bit. We'll see how it goes. Let us know.
And I've got a whisk here too, which I can also use. So I might use the whisk instead.
Should I start mixing?
Yes, please start mixing. Go for it.
So let's get in, while we're stirring and mixing and all that, let's get into all things Jane Russell.
Yeah.
So how did Jane get her start in show business?
Yeah, so Jane grew up in the San Fernando Valley. So she is a Valley girl. So even though she was born in Bemidji, I hope I'm saying that right, Minnesota, and she lived in Canada for a couple of years, her family moved down here when she was really young. So she is a Valley girl. And she graduated from Van Nuys High School in 1939 and didn't really know what she wanted to do. Her mother had been a stage actress for a little bit before Jane was born. And her mom, I think, always kind of put that bug in her ear a little bit. Didn't really push her, but kind of put it there. So I think Jane toyed with it growing up. She did play music though. She played piano, and her mother would have the kids, Jane and her 4 younger brothers, perform and do recitals. And after Jane graduated, she did take acting classes a little bit, wasn't super into it. And by chance, a friend of hers was discovered by Tom Kelly, the photographer, who many people know now as shooting the Marilyn Monroe nude photos that ultimately were in the first issue of Playboy. And so her friend was discovered and asked Tom Kelly, well, I don't know, I think my friend might be good for this too. Can I bring her along? And brought Jane to Tom Kelly's studio. Tom Kelly immediately identified, that Jane was gorgeous and super photogenic. And so Jane started posing for him, fashion stuff. So pretty modest. Jane would never pose nude. So she did a lot of fashion photography. And in late 1940, Howard Hawks and Howard Hughes were going to film The Outlaw. They were preparing for that. They wanted to cast unknowns in the lead. And there was an agent around town, Levis Green, who would sometimes visit Tom Kelly's studio just to kind of scope out the models that Tom Kelly had discovered because he had a good eye. And he saw this photo of Jane on the wall. And it was actually a very tightly framed photo of her face. So you couldn't see her physique at all. But he thought like she looked like the part that they were looking for. And so he swiped the photo off the wall and brought it to Howard Hughes and Hawks. And they decided, yeah, she looks pretty good. And she came in for a screen test and nailed it. And that's how she got the role in The Outlaw. And then Howard Hughes spent years promoting her, years and years.
Well, The Outlaw had such a troubled production. I feel like we could do an entire episode just about the troubled production of The Outlaw. But
I could have written an entire book about The Outlaw.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's just Howard Hughes was, well, God, there's so much to unpack about that whole situation. I don't even know where to start. He was like obsessed with Jane's breasts.
Yeah.
And constantly trying to design certain bras. Now, I've always heard she didn't wear the bras he designed.
No, so he designed a bra for her in The Outlaw that mainly was supposed to, it was a seamless bra because I think he wanted it to look like her breasts defied gravity so that it didn't look like she was wearing a bra. And so she tried it on and it was flimsy and she said, I'm not wearing this. And she threw it across the room and just put her own bra back on and put like tissue paper or tissue, like Kleenex, over the seams so that you couldn't see the seams. So she wears her own bra in The Outlaw. The cover of the book is she's wearing an outfit from Macau and she's wearing a sweater, and the costume designer, Michael Wolf, had to design that sweater with a built-in foundation garment so it wouldn't look like she was wearing a bra. So Hughes really wanted her to defy gravity, which, she was only human. But she tolerated it. And, she was very loyal to him. And she was under contract to him for over 30 years. So they drove each other crazy in some respects, but I think also had a lot of respect and admiration for each other. And I think, I get the impression it was, one of the more positive relationships and associations that Howard Hughes had over the course of his life. And we have questions.
Two questions, actually. Both the same person.
We have 2 questions.
Is it a legend that Howard Hughes discovered her when she worked as a consultant assistant, and Hughes offered her an exclusive contract running for decades, right?
Yeah, so the Hollywood publicity at the time said that Howard Hughes discovered Jane when he went to the dentist, and she was the receptionist, and that is not true. So that did circulate at the time. Jane years later said that wasn't true, and I tried to look up like the name of the dentist to see if it existed, and if she was working, it would have been in the Valley. So that isn't true. So she was discovered by the agent who took the photo over to them, and so she was under contract. She signed a couple of contracts with Hughes, kind of like the standard, like 7-year contracts with options. The first contract was pretty standard. The second one, I think, was a little bit better. And then ultimately she does sign a 20-year contract with him where she's paid $1,000 a week, whether she made movies or not. And I think that was him just, kind of thanking her for her loyalty over the years, because I don't know that people were always loyal to Howard Hughes. So yeah, so that is true.
So on
So
All right, I think we're ready for the next part of the.
Oh, is it melted? Is the chocolate totally melted?
It looks like.
Let me see. We're gonna check the chocolate to see if it's melted.
okay, my chocolate's pretty well melted. I can definitely smell it here.
Okay, so now we just need to wait
Now
for
we
it
need
to
to-
boil. So once it boils, then you can do this. It's not stupid. I think it's fabulous. Yeah. Okay.
Really like a funny story.
So the Outlaw, having seen The Outlaw, it's a terrible, terrible movie because Howard Hawks was fired by Hughes, and it's not a good movie. And it's not a great performance in Jane either, although you can see she's gorgeous and you can see she is definitely star material. It's such a lurid, kind of pulpy mess, really.
Well, and Howard Hughes wasn't a good director. So, Howard Hawks, he did not direct any of Jane's scenes in the film. He did direct the early part of the film, which was shot on location in Arizona. And it's really easy to tell what was shot on location. It's those first few scenes. And I think Jack Butel, who plays Billy the Kid, in those early scenes that Howard Hawks directed, I think he's fantastic. Like, I think he's really good. And I had watched The Outlaw years and years and years ago because I felt like I had to and was not impressed. And then I had to rewatch it. Feel sorry for me. I think I watched this movie like 3 times while writing this.
Oh, geez.
But the first time I watched it, when I revisited it, I'm watching it and Jack Butel, I'm like, gosh, he's not that bad. And then as the film progresses, he gets worse and worse, and he's so wooden because Howard Hughes was capable of telling people what he didn't want, but he couldn't tell people what he wanted. So it'd be like, Jack, you raised your eyebrow in that last scene. Don't do that. So by the end of the movie, I think he's just like standing completely still. And the same with Jane. So they're both incredibly wooden. The one scene that Jane had worked with Howard Hawks on was her introduction where she's wrestling with Billy the Kid in the haystack. That was the scene that she had done the screen test. And so Hawks had given her direction. And so when she filmed that in the actual film, she drew upon how he had directed her. And I think she's quite good in that scene. Her introduction scene, I think she's quite good. But yeah, as the rest of the film goes on, the two of them are just so wooden and so awful. And they would be the first to admit it. And poor Jack, his career didn't really go anywhere. Howard Hawks wanted to actually use him in Red River, and Howard Hughes wouldn't because he so resented that Hawks had like walked off the set or had so Montgomery Clift got the role instead. But fortunately Jane did get to work with Hawks and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes all those years later.
Hawks was a master.
Yeah.
And we did get another question.
We have another question, says Gable.
I have read her autobiography and seen a number of interviews. How were you able to do more research for this book? Have you talked with her children?
I was not able to speak with her children. I did reach out to 2 of them and never got a response. So there are, the nice thing is there are a lot of interviews. Jane left a lot of herself behind. So unlike my first book on Anne Dvorak, who kind of left nothing but her films behind, Jane did leave a lot of herself behind. And I was able to draw on a lot of primary source documents. So, as the title of the book says, one of the things I wanted to focus on was how she was marketed. And fortunately, Russell Birdwell's papers, he was the publicist behind The Outlaw. His papers are at UCLA. And so it was really interesting to go in and to see how Jane was discussed, like literally every day. There are memos about Jane and about The Outlaw. Wow. And to kind of see what a commodity she was treated like seldom a person, and even how she has been written about over the years. Always kind of treated like more of a thing. And so, and even going off of her own autobiography, which fortunately, is very candid and she's very honest. I think Jane didn't have airs about herself. In reading it, there are certainly parts of her story where I wish she would have expanded on it. Like she mentioned something, but what does that mean? So just by using the interviews and the primary source documents and some other people I was able to speak with, I hope it's a more fleshed out portrait of her. I didn't set out to write the definitive Jane Russell biography because I feel like so much of her was already out there, but I just wanted to kind of take it and kind of contextualize it and kind of make it a little bit more cohesive, because her autobiography kind of jumps around a little bit. So, but I do view my book as a companion to her autobiography, whereas my Anne Dvorak book, I feel like it is the work on Anne.
And we have another question. It's kind of more about the community.
Okay.
Can we take the readers for just a moment and see if I can.
Go ahead. Okay, hold on, baby.
The rotary beater.
Do you want to start doing that?
Okay, I'm gonna try this. If it mutes me, give me just a second. I will be right back.
Okay.
Yeah. Same with us.
Okay, go ahead and do it. Faster, baby. I would use your right hand.
Here.
You want me to do it?
Yes.
Okay, I will do this.
It's metal and it's hot.
Okay.
Well, it's blowing hot steam right into my face when I.
What if you want me to do it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can't do that for real long. So I'm gonna pour mine over. I have got this plastic ice tumbler thing, glass, and I put it in the freezer and I put some ice cubes in it. So I am gonna try pouring some of this into this.
It's supposed to get foamy. I don't know.
It's what it says. It says, beat a rotary beater until mixture becomes foamy. Allow mixture to reach boiling point and beat again with rotary beater. When mixture reaches the boiling point a third time, beat again. Serve immediately.
Okay, we'll let that. We're gonna let that boil again.
Christina, when I tried to use the rotary beater, it literally beat up steam right into my face, and I just cannot handle that today. So I just poured mine into an ice glass, and I'm just gonna consume it over ice.
So we're gonna let it cook a little bit longer, and then we'll see how that goes.
The question is the Young Widow movie available anywhere? Lily Jane movie, I don't know. I do not know.
I don't know if The Young Widow is available officially. It is on YouTube though. That's how I watched it. So, but I don't know if it's actually been released. It was a Hunt Stromberg production, so I don't know if it's actually been released. So it's on YouTube. The quality is so. But it is, available that way.
And there's someone said that she always seemed very honest in interviews, unlike many stars.
She always seemed on. Yeah, Jane was very honest. I mean, Jane was not somebody who, yeah, I think the rotary beater is in the pan right there. I think, yeah, she just didn't have time. She was very, kind of practical and forthright and didn't have, time for nonsense. So, she never tried to sugarcoat things. And, in her book, she's very forthcoming about a lot of private things in her life. And I think for her, if she was going to write her story, there was no other way to write it. She was just going to be completely honest, because why wouldn't you? So, yeah, absolutely.
So after The Outlaw, let's talk about the follow-up films that she did after The Outlaw.
So the thing about Jane's career that I found astounding, because I didn't really realize it before, is that, she is introduced to the world. Can you give the dog a cookie, babe? Sorry, my dog is crying. She's introduced to the world in early 1941 with publicity from The Outlaw.
Yeah.
Throughout the entirety of the 1940s, she only has 3 movies come out. And so The Outlaw, even though it finishes shooting in 41, it premieres in San Francisco in 43 and has a little 6 or 7 week run. And then it is released in 1946 on a very limited basis through United Artists. And it's not widely released until 1950 through RKO. So it takes almost a full decade for this movie to be widely released throughout the country. Young Widow is 1946. So it is, 5 years actually in between making movies. And then the third movie she makes is The Paleface with Bob Hope, just this A picture with Paramount. So it's incredible to me that she had a career, because she should have just been kind of written off by that point. But she does The Paleface, and she's marvelous in it. She is just a wonderful straight person to Bob Hope, and I think she's absolutely hysterical in it. And from then on, through the early and mid 1950s, she has a pretty solid career that really cements her as a movie star for the ages.
I agree. I love her in The Pale Face because it was such a change of pace for her in terms of movie making and also the environment. Like I've read that she said like this was so different from making The Outlaw and making the Hughes films the way Bob Hope and Paramount and that whole crew worked. So
yeah, because even like the Outlaw was pretty brutal to make because Howard Hughes, he was so meticulous. That it took a long time, but but she didn't know any better. She thought that's how it was made, and even The Young Widow went through more than one director, and so she thought that was normal, where it switched directors and just took a long time. And then she goes to Paramount to make The Pale Face, and it's like this efficient studio. It's one director. It's like Bob Hope. It's one take and done, and it was an absolute joy. It was much less tedious than those first two films. So I think
you can tell just watching it, she's having a blast. I mean, it's right there on screen when you see the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And she modeled her character after her husband, Robert Waterfield, whose nickname was Stoneface because he was a pretty serious guy. So she just channeled him while playing Calamity Jane, who is pretty stone-faced in that movie, but she pulls it off.
Another question.
Oh, we have another question.
Give me a second, I'm gonna plug in go ahead with the question, Gable, while I plug in
We'll
my
on top of it.
board here.
What did Jane Russell do during those 5 years of not making films?
Yeah, so she got married. She went up to, like I said, she went up to San Francisco for the premiere of The Outlaw, and during its 7-week run, she did a stage show in between. And originally it was a skit that was supposedly a scene that had been cut from The Outlaw, and it wasn't very good and it wasn't well received. And then I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Alan Jenkins was sent up there to do like a comedy routine with Jane and Jack Butel. And it wasn't, I don't think that was very good either. And she was pretty miserable. And, by this time, it's 1943, the United States is involved in the war, and Jack Butel was going to be going into the service. And she heard rumblings that Howard Hughes was going to roadshow The Outlaw and have it show in different cities, and that he was going to send her on the road. And she just didn't want to do it. So she went back home. She eloped with Robert Waterfield, who had been her teenage sweetheart. And he goes into the army and gets stationed in Georgia. And she follows him there. So she's, for a while, she's over in Georgia while he's, in basic training. And then he ended up playing for the Army football team. Once he's discharged, they come back. He gets drafted by the Cleveland Rams. They were in Cleveland originally. So she goes to Cleveland, and she's just kind of like a football housewife. So he's just kind of, not doing a whole lot. But again, she hated to cook. She wasn't a super domestic. And even though she didn't aggressively pursue a film career early on, I think after, just being kind of a housewife for a while, she decided that, maybe she really did want a film career. So she pursued it a little bit more. She certainly appreciated it a little bit more, and I think was willing to deal with Howard Hughes.
So she makes The Pale Face, and then I have always loved the films that she made with His Kind of Woman and Macau, right?
The two with Mitchum, yeah.
With Mitchum. I love the two of them together. That is also magic.
Yeah, they're wonderful together. And there was an interview that I quote in the book. It was a TCM interview, actually, and they asked her, why do you think that, that she and Mitchum were so great together on screen? And she paused for a moment and said, we just look like we deserved each other. And I think that's so true. And both of those films, like she really comes into her own. Prior to that, like in between Pale Face and His Kind of Woman, she actually made Double Dynamite and Montana Belle. But both of those Howard Hughes shelved for a couple of years. So that's why we have that jump from Pale Face to His Kind of Woman. But she looks fantastic. I think she really becomes like Jane Russell as we know her in those two films, followed by Las Vegas Story. Like those three films, she is stunning. Her costumes are amazing. And I think it is the Jane Russell that we really think of.
Question.
Okay, we have a question.
Jane and Mitchum were hot together. Any carrying on offset?
I don't know for sure. So there is Jane in her autobiography. she does reference I don't know if I want to call it a fling, but like a romance that she had, but she gives the person the alias of Lance. And, there is a Jane Russell, a huge Jane Russell fan who I got to know while I was writing this book. And he kind of thought maybe Robert Mitchum was Lance in the book, and we don't know for sure. So I don't know if they did or didn't. They were great friends though, and they remained great friends for their entire lives until Mitchum passed away, and later on they lived near each other. So yeah, so that chemistry was on screen and off. Like whether it was romantic off screen, I don't know that we'll ever know for sure.
Well, they both seem like intensely private people, so if anything happened, yeah, we probably wouldn't have.
Yeah, they're not going to scream it to the rooftops. And both were married, at the time that they were working together. So yeah, I don't know, but they were great friends though. Absolutely. And if you've never seen, Robert Osborne interviewed the two of them together years later, and Mitchum is so grumpy in that interview, but I think it is still fun to see the two of them together.
Oh, definitely. Well, what surprised me in kind of getting ready for this episode, I hadn't realized she didn't have that long of a career compared to, say, Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, a lot of their contemporaries. So it kind of amazed me. She's got such iconic status when her film career was maybe, 20-something features?
Yeah, it's not that many, and it's pretty, compact, so she doesn't make that much in the 40s, and the majority of those films that we know her for were made between 1948 and 56. And she makes a smattering of films after 56 up through the late 60s, but no, it's like this very concentrated period. Yeah, she didn't make that many. So I think her association with Howard Hughes, I think, has given her name and her legacy a lot of legs, along with making that, The Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Like, it is just kind of one of the greatest comedies. It's personally my favorite Marilyn film. Yeah, so I think, being in a film like that really, I think, cemented her legacy for a lot of us.
I think it's interesting too, because there are some stars that never made a film that's maybe super, super iconic, and then there are other stars that maybe didn't have as many films, but the ones they made, or some of the ones they made, were so iconic that they're so well remembered today.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Jane, there wasn't that many, but it is Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. It is the pale face, it is his kind of woman. She does, in a movie, I don't think it's talked about that much, but she made a Raoul Walsh directed Western, The Tall Men, with Clark Gable, which is like a sweeping CinemaScope Fox film that, so she had, it wasn't a lot of films, but the quality on a lot of them is there. Certainly.
What surprised me in her filmography is when I watched The Revolt of Mamie Stover.
Mm-hmm.
And it's shot on location in Hawaii, and it kind of surprised me because her character, if I'm remembering this correctly, is kind of like taking advantage of other people and during the war. And I just thought, that's a little different. I mean, it's unexpected, I think.
It is, but also, maybe honey, do you want to turn off turn off the stove? I don't want our chocolate to maybe turn off the stove and do it. Yeah, Mamie Stover, that movie is fascinating to me because it is, I think, a different character for her. It should just be so much better. I mean, that is a film that is just, the production code just takes so much out of that film because, it's based on a pulp novel of, a woman who is just battered by Hollywood. In the book, she's literally scarred. Her face is scarred, and she is shipped on a cargo ship to Hawaii into prostitution. And it's how she just kind of takes advantage of the system and makes it work for her, and just makes a ton of money during the war, as a prostitute, but also, taking advantage of the real estate market and being like a profiteer. And by the end of the book, she has her house on the hill in Hawaii, and she succeeds. So she's treated with, maybe some contempt in the book, but also she's, an admirable character in a lot of ways because she's just kind of given a bum deal and takes advantage of it. But of course, when it comes to Hollywood screens, she can't be all that. So it's like much more mellow. And the revolt is her going against these 13 articles put forth by Hawaiian police. But in the book, she's revolting against Agnes Moorehead, who's the madam of the brothel that's not a brothel, because apparently, the guys come in and the girls just dance and I don't know, like play canasta with them or something. So it's so like production code just, makes that movie, way less interesting than it should have been. But it's filmed on location in Hawaii and it's gorgeous. Like it is a beautiful film. Trivia did her costumes. There's great costumes. Agnes Moorehead and Jane, the whole movie could have just been the two of them, I think, like just, running brothels all around Hawaii because they're just great together. And there's just this marvelous scene. They, reenact the bombing of Pearl Harbor, but they used, the local population to film these evacuation scenes. So it was a massive production. So yeah, it's a movie that I like, but don't, I want to like more than I do, but I still think it's a fascinating film. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
I didn't know what to make of it at first. I was like, this is interesting. It wasn't what I thought it would be or expected it to be. It was just, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and of course she's forced to repent at the end. Like she's not allowed to get her house on the hill because Joseph Breen wouldn't allow it. So that's kind of irritating. But an interesting side note on that, there is a scene in the brothel, not a brothel, where there's one of the girls is playing cards with the guy, and she is wearing the gold lame dress that Marilyn Monroe wore briefly in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes that we see from behind, but she did a whole photo shooting, like a really famous photo shoot of Marilyn in this gold lame dress. And it's just recycled in Revolt of Mamie Stover, which I think is just fascinating. That it's just this iconic dress and, just somebody without any lines is just wearing it in the movie. So yeah, if you watch it, look out for that.
There's
Here's Gabe. Oh, go ahead.
Cool comment.
There's a cool comment.
Jane was schoolmates with Marilyn Monroe's first husband.
That's right. So Jane was in the same graduating class of Van Nuys High School as James Dougherty, who was Marilyn's first husband. That is true.
And also Marilyn turned down the Revolt of Mamie Stover.
Marilyn turned down the Revolt of Mamie Stover? I don't remember if I came across that or not. That was a good move on Marilyn's part, I'd say. That movie's just not, yeah. I still think it's worth watching. I do think it's worth watching though. I really do.
So what do you think made her film career kind of slow? Because after 1956, it's just, more sporadic.
Yeah, I don't know 100% for sure. I think she was just kind of tired at that point. So she did end up starting her own production company with her husband, Russ Field, in 1954. And, they made 4 films, 2 of them starring Jane, and the 2 with Jane ended up not making money. And I think she just, she had been where even though she wasn't making a lot of films, like once it accelerated, she's exhausted. And I think she's just kind of tired of it. And Howard Hughes by that time was kind of, phasing himself out of the film industry. So she wasn't really getting pressure from him. Yes, you can, dear. So she wasn't really getting pressure from Howard Hughes to make movies. And, I think she was just kind of tired of it. And I think, she would come back every so often. But I think by that time she was just kind of done.
Yeah, and looking at so many different careers, I think a lot of the stars, it's just interesting to kind of trace them, would get to a point where they're like, my heart is not in it. I'm tired. I'm over it. I want to do other stuff, or I just don't have the spirit for it anymore. And there almost comes a time when many of them kind of hit that wall,
Yeah. And I feel like my first book on Anne Dvorak, I think she just because she just stopped making movies. Like that was it. And I think it was the same thing. But Jane, not to say she didn't love performing though, because Jane loved performing. She loved singing, I think, more than anything else, like more than acting. And so, she started recording in the late 40s, like with Kay Kaiser, and she made a few albums, and so she developed like a nightclub act. So like starting in the 40s, she was like frequently performing live. So she did that like in between making movies. And eventually she joins with Connie Haynes and Beryl Davis, and they, all of them were very spiritual, and so they formed kind of like this Christian pop group. And so they recorded like a full album, and they toured the world performing. So Jane had a whole other career as a singer that I think people don't realize. And up until the very end of her life, she was up in Santa Maria and, had her nightclub act that she performed. Like, she was doing that right up until the time that she died. So I think, even though we all know her and remember her as a film star, she was also very much a singer and loved it. And I think would have liked to have been remembered as a singer as well, because she enjoyed it so much. So she certainly, and she did do some stage. So she did quite a bit of stock theater. She did one Broadway show. So she actually replaced Elaine Stritch in Company in the 70s, and was terrified to go on stage on Broadway, but did it, and was very well received, but then got bored with it. So thought doing a Broadway show for a long time was kind of boring, so she stopped with that. But yeah, she was always out there though. Like, she was always out there performing. She was always out there showing up on talk shows and giving interviews. And I think Jane was always very, very generous with herself. She gave a lot of herself to the world.
She didn't just leave the screen and pull a Garbo.
No, not at all. Not at all. No.
Also, after I went to your signing yesterday, it was so great to see so many familiar faces from our Hollywood film community. But also, you had some wonderful posters and magazines and memorabilia. And I took a picture of the Jane Russell branded dress and earrings you had in the display case. And someone commented, I didn't know Jane had a clothing line too.
She did. So in the 80s, and that was something Jane was always, she loved design. So I think she said if she hadn't become an actress, she would have probably become a designer of some type. She was particularly interested in interior design, and she was responsible for designing this fabulous mid-century modern home she shared with Robert Waterfield in Sherman Oaks, which there was recently an article in Architectural Digest about it, so you can Google it and get to that. She also designed an apartment building in Van Nuys on Woodman, Tau West, which is, it's condos now, but it's still there. So I drive past it frequently and wave. But that love of design did carry over into clothing. So in the 80s, she had a clothing line for full-figured women, and it was clothing and jewelry. And I don't know that it was really widespread or got put into a lot of shops, but yeah, like it'll sometimes, like, pieces will pop up. So I've been able to find like a set of earrings and like a nightgown and then a little robe. So yeah, that was something she did. And it was like specifically designed, for what now we'd call plus size. And she was, she wanted to design attractive clothing for women who were bigger, which in the 80s, that wasn't around. So believe me, I know.
Underserved demographic, So
yeah.
that was a great idea.
Traditionally, yeah, has been very underserved, I think until fairly recently. So yeah, kudos to Jane for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just think she's an interesting person. So I'm really excited because there's never been a biography about her that I know of at all, besides the autobiography she wrote. So I think this book is definitely so timely. It's so great that it's coming out the week of her centennial.
Yes. That was very, that was very, very calculated on my part. Like, I wanted the book to come out in time for her centennial. I thought that was very important, which meant that during the first 3 weeks of the lockdown last year, I was, telecommuting in my bedroom is where my desk is. So I was like telecommuting and figuring that out as the world is falling apart. And then from 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. every night for like 3 weeks, I was like finishing this book to hit the deadline. But that wasn't the easiest thing to do, but I'm glad I did it, because I'm happy the book's out in time for her 100th birthday, because I think there should be a big celebration of Jane, because I think she's fascinating, and she gave a lot of herself, and I'm glad we have her, because she's fascinating to watch on screen. I think she's absolutely mesmerizing.
Which brings another question up, is Los Angeles and possibly other cities going to be lucky enough to get a Jane Russell retrospective of her films?
I hope so. I certainly hope so. We're working on a couple of things locally. Yeah, I would love to see that happen. Darren, who's another reoccurring guest, said you should go do Mamie Stover in Hawaii, and I'm like, find me a theater that'll do it, and I will gladly.
Tax
I have no problem doing that. So yeah, I was able to do a couple of screenings for Anne Dvorak that were out of the area. So hopefully, as things start to open up and people get more comfortable with being out there, I certainly hope so, because, I think a lot of people know about The Outlaw, and they certainly know about Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and maybe the Mitchum movies and The Pale Face, but there are some others that I think are worth watching that aren't as well known. So I would love to see those on the big screen.
In 2003, 2004, there was a gigantic 3D festival that went like a month at the Egyptian Theater, and I went to part of it. And I saw The French Line with Jane Russell in 3D, and she was there for the Q&A. And I want to talk about the marketing aspect that you talk about in your book, because on the posters, it said she'll knock Jane Russell in 3D. She'll knock both your eyes out. Nothing subtle about that at all. So I'd like to talk about that marketing aspect of only marketing things around her breast, and kind of how that, well, I guess why that was done is, I guess, obvious, but how that kind of affected her, how she felt about that, and what, I don't know, why some of those decisions were made.
Well, I think those decisions were made solely because of Howard Hughes. So I think he was, he was absolutely obsessed with her breasts. So like in the book, I have a memo that he wrote about the gold lame dress in Macau. And I don't know how many times he uses the word nipples in it. Like, it's incredible how obsessed he was. I mean, I guess to his credit, like, it got people talking. Like, people all these years still remember that marketing. Personally, yeah, she hated it. Like, she hated it, I guess, saw it as a necessary evil in a way. So, when The Outlaw, when it first got released in San Francisco, they had these giant posters of her in the haystack with the gun from
Very
the Pharrell
iconic.
photo shoot. Yeah, very iconic. And the posters, they were doctored to, like, her, when she actually took the photo, the blouse was not that see-through and it wasn't ripped, but they were embellished so that she's just kind of popping out. And so she has, like, her mom is going up to San Francisco and her aunt is going up there to see the premiere. And when they go up there, this is what they're seeing around the city, are these giant billboards, which eventually came down because, there were groups that were throwing a fit about them. And there was a giant 24 sheet of that image on the theater. So no, she wasn't happy about that. But I have a story where, like, her aunt went to see Howard Hughes to, like, yell at him about it. And Howard Hughes somehow convinced him that this was the best, convinced Aunt Ernie this was the best way to promote the film. So yeah, she wasn't happy about it. I think she learned to live with it. Like, she knew that the way she looked was so much of why she had a career. So she dealt with it. Once we get to The French Line, though, I mean, she's been putting up with Howard Hughes and this way of marketing her for well over a decade. And The French Line is where she actually starts to draw the line. So first off, there's the number at the end of the film, Looking for Trouble, and Howard Hughes wanted her to wear a bikini for that number, like a bejeweled bikini, and it was actually made, and she did fittings for it. And it was too much. It was just too much to be that exposed on film. So she walked out on the film. She went on strike. And so finally they reached a compromise. And so she wears that kind of leotard with the teardrop cutouts in it. So she compromised there and dealt with it. But then when she sees the film, that Looking for Trouble number, it actually is pretty provocative. If you see the original version of it, which is what European audiences got, and the way that number is shot, it's kind of overhead, it's looking down, it's close-ups, and it actually is very provocative. American audiences got a version of it that's all in long shot, and when it's in long shot, it's actually kind of boring. But that original cut of it, he premieres in St. Louis, because they had a huge Catholic population. So it was all very calculated on Howard Hughes's part. And so the movie gets declared a mortal sin, specifically because of that number. and she, you know, and because of the advertising of that film, she said enough. And at that time, her contract with Hughes was expiring, and she said, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." And in private, he told her, "Okay, Jane, I won't do this to you again. Don't tell anybody I said it, because I'll deny it, but I'm not going to do that to you anymore." And so, yeah, so she certainly tolerated it over the years, and but kind of drew the line on the French line. But again, you know, was tongue in cheek about it later on, because she did the Playtex bra commercials. But you know, when asked about that publicity later on in her career, she was usually pretty quick to just roll her eyes. So I think, you know, had it been her decision, no, that's not how she would have been marketed. But she managed to keep her head on straight and stay sane, which I don't know a lot of people could have.
I couldn't have.
Yeah,
We do
being
have
objectified by
question.
that. Oh, Gable is back.
I'm back.
She was indisposed briefly. What do we have, honey?
Abel, what are the folks saying?
Yeah, what do we, go ahead, honey.
Did Jane wear a red wig as Mamie Stover, or did she dye her own hair?
She did, but Jane did dye her hair red for Mamie Stover, but is wearing a wig. So I guess to just make sure it all looked convincing, but that is a wig. Okay, is that it? Okay.
Did she ever consider a TV series?
Did Jane ever consider a TV series? She actually did shoot a pilot called McCready's Woman. And it did air, but it didn't go anywhere from there. She was, you know, because the early days of television were live, and that terrified her. So yeah, she didn't really launch into it in the 50s the way other people did. But she did do that pilot, which I was fortunate enough to see, and I think she's fabulous in it. But I think after that, I don't know that she ever really pursued having her own television series.
Somebody did respond to that she was in the Yellow Rose series on TV.
She was in the Yellow Rose series, but in the 80s with Sam Elliott and Sybil Shepherd, but she's just in a couple of episodes. In one of the episodes, though, she's totally riding a horse. Like, Jane was a very good horsewoman. She grew up, you know, on a ranch and rode horses in the Tujunga Wash before it was channelized. And so I just love that all those years later, she still was like totally cool, like just getting on a horse in the 80s and trotting around with Sam Elliott.
And also, will Foxfire be screening in LA?
Go up. Will Foxfire be screening in LA? I don't know, but man, do I hope so. Foxfire, yeah, I think Foxfire was my biggest like Jane revelation while writing this book. That was a film I wasn't even aware of, and I think it's a marvelous film.
So that was your revelation, film-wise, about Jane.
Yeah.
What was your biggest revelation about her personally when you read the book?
I think personally was the work that she did with her foundation, her Waif Foundation, which was her life's work. So Jane adopted 3 kids, you know, but adoption is never an easy process. And so one of her kids, who she ultimately adopted, she had brought over from England, and had caused this huge international uproar where Parliament was outraged and the FBI opened a file on her. And it was such a negative experience just trying to adopt, you know, at the time you had these orphanages in other countries overflowing after the war, and there were so many restrictions on both sides. There were, you know, quotas that couldn't, you know, that would be capped, and so many restrictions that she decided she would actually try to do something about it. And so she formed an organization called Waif, who for many years were the fundraising arm for international social services. So she enabled that organization to be able to process adoptions and hire workers to do it. She did advocacy work. She lobbied Congress to ease restrictions. And that was something she threw herself into for over 40 years. So I think there was, you know, like around 45,000 kids that, you know, supposedly because of Waif's work were able to be adopted. And that was just something she really believed in, and she was always promoting it. She was always trying to figure out how to work Waif into what she did. So like when she makes Mamie Stover, she starts looking into how there can be a Waif chapter in Hawaii. You know, anytime Howard Hughes wanted her to go do publicity somewhere, she would say, okay, I need an open-ended plane ticket. So that way she could like go to Washington to go meet with Congress people about legislation coming up. Or if she did one of her gala events, you know, she would have Howard Hughes buy a table, whether he knew it or not. And so I think that was one of the reasons why she was kind of able to reconcile her screen image and how she was promoted, because it enabled her to use her celebrity to benefit the Wave Foundation. And so I think that was so fascinating, and just how much of herself she put into it, and was never, like, look at me, look at what I'm doing, look how great I am. That she just did it because she genuinely believed in it.
I heard one story about Jane that I thought was really, really cool. I can't remember who told me, but one thing that is known is that Jane was very conservative and very religious, and that she was going to go to the Castro and do an event at the Castro, like a Q&A. And the guy told me, I think he was hosting it or something, and he said he was terrified that Jane would not like him because he was gay, because it's San Francisco, the Castro, and he was really worried about how she would react. And he said she was so accepting and so nice and so lovely. And he said, you know what, I shouldn't judge people because sometimes you just don't know. And
Yeah.
she was not at all what he thought she would be like.
Yeah. And I do think that's one of the great contradictions about Jane, because there was this article of her in Esquire in the early 70s where she does make comments about homosexuals that are not flattering. Like it was an article I was very disappointed to see. But then when I interviewed people that knew her, they're like, "Nah, Jane didn't judge people. Like, she spouted stuff off, but so she's very contradictory in that manner." But that was one of the things with that Castro performance. Her manager at the time was like concerned if there was going to be a drag show beforehand, and there was. So there were men performing as Jane and Marilyn, because of course there was going to be. And she found out that performance was going to take place, and her manager said, "Janie, you don't need to watch that. We'll put you in the green room." And she's like, "I want to see that." And she watched the show and took pictures with them. So yeah, so Jane like talked one way, acted another way, and it's, was completely maddening, but that's Jane.
There could be more tolerance and love in the world. I think we just have a much better world.
Absolutely. And again, that's one of the things I love her, like going back to Marilyn Monroe. I think, like you said, like women are often catty towards each other or pitted against each other. And the press, I think, did try to pit Marilyn and Jane, and she was never like that. She always wanted to see other women succeed. One of my favorite stories is she met Portia Nelson, who is an actress and a songwriter. She's in The Sound of Music, is probably where most people know her. And Jane met Portia Nelson on the set of Young Widow. Portia was the assistant, I believe, to Andre de Toth, who was the director for like a week or two on that film. Jane hit it off with Portia and found out that Portia was a songwriter and a good one. And Jane said, "Why aren't you doing that?" And like really, pushed her to go down that route. And when Jane goes to make Montana Belle, she talked to the director, Alan Dewan, and said she wanted to perform on screen. She hadn't sung on screen because she didn't sing in The Paleface. And Dewan says, "Okay, if you want to, you're in a saloon. If you want to perform, like what song are you going to perform?" She went and got one of Portia Nelson's songs, The Gilded Lily. And so that's the first time, that's the first time Jane performs on screen, is the song of her friend who she wanted to promote. And so I love that Jane, I think genuinely wanted to see people succeed and just wasn't envious of other people or just wasn't insecure in that way. And so that's something that I think, I think we could all try to emulate, because I think our insecurities a lot of the time prohibits us from having really good friendships. And Jane didn't seem to do that.
That was really, I love that
question.
Sure.
Here comes Gable from the floor. Yes.
Who's the subject of your next book?
Who is the subject of my next book? I'm hoping my next subject is not a who, but a what. I desperately want to write a book on Movieland Wax Museum that was in Buena Park, which is even though it has not been around since 2005, is my favorite place on the face of the planet. And it actually has a pretty fascinating history. So I'm hoping I can write a book on that. I'm hoping somebody will want to publish a book on Movieland Wax Museum. So that is my next subject, I hope. And we have another question. Okay, Gable is, okay.
In honor of Father's Day, did she have a good relationship with her dad?
Jane did have a good relationship with her dad. He wasn't the most outwardly loving person. He was kind of like a very closed off, reserved person, which her first husband was as well. Unfortunately, her father passed away when she was only 16.
Oh,
So I think he was only, 47 years old. But yeah, I think when she did talk about him, it was, in a positive manner. But yeah, unfortunately, she lost him at a very young age.
We have some Hollywood Wax Museum that'd be fun. They'll buy that book.
What was that?
We have some Hollywood Wax Museum that would be fun. I'll buy that book.
Yes.
And then we also have a comment about Jane. She said in an interview that she became an alcoholic after her third husband died.
So Jane became an alcoholic was actually after her second husband died. So Jane had always been kind of a heavy drinker, but I think a lot of people were heavy drinkers at that time. So it was that era where like you came home and the first thing you did was pour a drink. So I think her and Waterfield, were heavy drinkers. But Jane, her second husband Roger Barrett was an actor, and he passed away. He had a heart attack, I think 2 months after they got married. And it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. And so Jane, yes, so she did become a very heavy drinker after that experience that I don't know she ever truly got over. And then I think really battled alcohol on and off for quite a few years after that. After her third husband passed away, John Peoples, in 1999, I think she eventually was able to overcome that. So I think the last few years of her life, she finally was sober. But yeah, after that second husband died, it was really, really impacted her tremendously.
oh, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Oh, we have.
Is that all we have? Do we want to try the hot chocolate, Gable? Do you want to why don't you get a glass and fill it with ice? Because it certainly is too hot. It's I think it's 85 degrees here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it is. It is very hot today.
What?
It forms a skin.
Okay, here, why don't we bring this over? It has
It forms
formed.
like a
Here, bring that
skin.
over. Bring that over.
It forms like a skin, and then you can mix it again.
Yeah. Why don't you get a glass of ice and we will try. You've been drinking it, Carrie. How is it?
It's pretty good. I would definitely recommend waiting till it gets a lot cooler and before pouring over ice, which I did not. But it tastes pretty good. It's just like a cold summer version of hot chocolate.
Okay, I'm excited. I think it's my first time ever using allspice as an ingredient.
It's so expensive in the store in the spice section, but I went to the section where they have the spices in the little plastic bags, and it was a fraction of the price.
Was it? I had to actually go to the stores. My neighbor's texting me right now. She's at the store right now asking me if I want allspice, because I texted her this morning. I'm like, do you own allspice? So now I have a lot of allspice. So. Okay, we ready to try this?
You have first.
What?
You are trying first.
I'm trying it first. Okay, I guess you can put that in the sink now.
Put the one more mix.
One more mix of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Goodbye, weird old timey mixer.
I'll put that in the sink.
I think we should, once you get your drink ready, I think we should toast Jane's centennial.
We should. Okay. For this.
I don't know where.
I think we need a little bit more ice. So I think we really want to cool this down. Okay, but
I
we can.
really do hope that a retrospective happens in LA and other cities around the world, because the 100 year is a big deal. And also, like a lot of these stars that we love, she was made for the big screen.
Was. I mean, she was truly like larger than life.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the camera loved her. She had she did have like a wonderful physique for just those glamorous designs, and she worked with wonderful designers. So absolutely, I hope so. And there's one film that I would actually love to see. Her last film that she made, or that was released, is a film called Cauliflower Cupids, and it was like written and directed by Peter Savage, and it stars like Jake LaMotta and a bunch of other boxers. And it is like a very 1960s kind of goofy movie. I think Jane's fabulous in it. And Peter Savage's daughter has been trying to get it restored. And so I need to get in touch with her. And she actually, there's a photo of Jane and Peter Savage on the set of that movie that she let me use. And if she was able to do that, I think it would be a fun movie to screen, because I'm sure it's something that nobody has seen. So yeah, I do hope. All right. Are we
We do
ready?
have one last question.
Oh, we have a question.
That ties between Jane and Movieland.
Yes.
Did Jane have a figure at Movieland Wax Museum?
Jane did not have a figure at Movieland Wax Museum. How wrong is that?
We have
That's so
they
wrong.
had out for a Father's Day event, but they had a fun.
Oh,
great
Danny.
discussion.
It was Danny. Thank you,
Hashtag
Danny Miller.
thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Danny, for joining us. Okay, are we
Team
ready? Are we ready to toast Jane?
All right.
All right.
Toast to Jane.
Our spiced hot chocolate. Happy Centennial, Jane. Ooh,
I don't
You
want
like it?
spicy.
that's good. It's not spicy.
Huh.
Go ahead and try it.
Gable?
I don't know. I don't.
Gable
really
is-
like it.
Gable is probably one of the more picky eaters on the face of the planet. So she drinks water and milk. That's all she will drink. No.
Do you, I know you have Jane memorabilia. Is there anything you have handy you can share with us?
Oh, okay. I apologize for my messy house, but I will turn this around. And there is
Oh my gosh, that is the crown jewel.
there's the 6 sheet. Yes,
I'm here.
That is just spectacular.
there is. And there's actually, for those of you that live locally at Larry Edmonds, I still have that display case that has a couple of her yearbooks and her clothing line from the 80s. That's still on display along with some of my posters that were hanging up last night. But yeah, the 6 sheet is the crown jewel of the collection, certainly.
That is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
So just want to remind everybody, please order Christina's book, Mean, Moody, Magnificent, Jane Russell and the Marketing of a Hollywood Legend. And if you can, please order at Larry Edmonds and support this incredible independent bookstore in Hollywood.
And speaking of Larry Edmonds, so tomorrow for Jane's actual birthday, I will be doing a virtual program with Larry Edmonds.
Should I show the flyer? The beautifully made flyer.
Well, we will post your beautiful flyer that you made because it is a beautiful flyer. So to celebrate Jane and her love of singing, I am going to be performing some of Jane's songs on the guitar and singing. Oh, Gable has it hand. I don't know if that's gonna.
Okay.
Oh, there's the wonderful flyer, if you can see it, that Gable created, which we can post.
Yeah.
But you can go to Larry Edmonds' website and get the link to register for it. It is free. I think it should be fun. I hope I don't make a total fool out of myself.
You won't.
We will-
It'll be awesome.
That's tomorrow.
Fabulous posters.
It is a fabulous poster.
Also known for the Larry Edmonds.
So that is tomorrow, Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
All right. Well, Christina and Gable, thank you so much for joining me. This was so much fun to hang out with you and talk about Jane, make some hot chocolate, and celebrate this woman who was a fascinating lady and certainly a true spring icon.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Just walk off.
Hold on.